I endorse the program because it's science driven, but the missing element is urgency.
Welcome to News9, the podcast where we delve into all things particle physics. Do you want to know what is going on at the Large Hadron Collider? Why scientists want to build new, massive particle smashers? Or how particle physicists are seeking to answer some of the biggest open questions about our universe? If you answered yes to these questions, then you're in the right place. I am your host, particle physicist, Dr. Sam Gregson. In this podcast, we will cover cutting-edge particle physics research, the fascinating future of the field, and interview active physicists attempting to unravel the deepest mysteries of our universe at the very smallest of scales. Welcome. Now let's get into the quantum weeds. What's up, you scholars of enlightenment? Dr. Sam Gregson, particle physicist here again. I hope you had a brilliant Christmas and are enjoying a fantastic new year. Now it's time to get back to the fascinating world of particle physics. Today we're going to be discussing the future of European particle physics and CERN. The European particle physics community is currently deciding where the field should focus next after the discovery of the Higgs Boson at the Large Hadron Collider in 2012. In March 2024, the update to the European Strategy for Particle Physics process was launched. The ESPP, the European Strategy for Particle Physics, is a bottom-up process that engages the entire European particle physics community and accepts national input from CERN's member and associate member states and international partners. This input provides expert suggestions regarding the focus of research and development efforts, theory priorities, and which experiments should be prioritized going forwards. The input is consolidated and assessed by the European Strategy Group, the ESG, a body appointed by the CERN Council, which then provides suggestions directly to that council. The goal of the European Strategy for Particle Physics is the development of a common vision for the future of the field and a concrete plan for its implementation. This plan will seek to ensure that Europe continues to attract and promote international collaboration and continues to play a leading role in particle physics in the coming decades. In December 2025, following a dedicated meeting in Ascona, Switzerland, the European Strategy Group took the recommendations of the field and drafted its recommendations to the CERN Council, including its preferred option for the next collider at CERN and alternative options to be pursued if that preferred plan turns out to not be economically viable. One of the key recommendations of the ESG is that CERN moves forward with the full Future Circular Collider program. The FCC program will see the digging of a 100-kilometer long tunnel in the Geneva Basin, followed by the construction of an electron-positron colliding Higgs Factory Collider, the FCCEE, which should be operational in the 2040s. This Higgs Factory will then be replaced by a proton-proton colliding FCCHH, essentially a larger version of the current Large Hadron Collider, in the 2070s, allowing physicists to probe collisions an order of magnitude higher in energy than those currently occurring in the Large Hadron Collider. The recommendations of the ESG have met with a mixed reception from the European particle physics community. Members are concerned that these recommendations do not offer appropriate flexibility, lock the European particle physics community into decades of pre-planned work in a constantly changing technological climate, and do not appropriately consider paths forward presented by the community. Today, we will discuss these recommendations, illuminate their pros and cons, and debate the future of European particle physics and CERN. To help me do that, I'm joined by two brilliant special guests. Firstly, we welcome Professor John Womersley. Professor Womersley is a special advisor within the College of Science and Engineering at the University of Edinburgh. He worked at Fermilab before becoming a scientific advisor to the Department of Energy in the US. He then returned to the UK in 2005 to become director of the Particle Physics Department at the STFC Rutherford Appleton Laboratory at a time when it was building and delivering vital components to CERN's Large Hadron Collider. In time, Professor Womersley took on a broader role as director of the Science Programmes Office and was then appointed chief executive of STFC in 2011. He has also served on the councils of both CERN and the ESO, and the board of the Associated Universities for Research in Astronomy. He's chaired the European Strategy Forum on Research Infrastructures and the European Commission's expert group on cost control and management in large research infrastructures. He's also served on numerous review panels and boards as an expert, including for the Helmholtz Association and the Human Brain Project. He has seen how large-scale projects get delivered. Secondly, we're joined by Professor John Butterworth. Professor Butterworth is an experimental particle physicist at the University of College London and a member of the Atlas collaboration at the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. His research investigates what nature is like at the smallest distances and the highest energies, and as such, he's deeply invested in what new experiments, theoretical directions, and research and development efforts can tell us about the fundamental building blocks of our universe. He frequently discusses physics in public, including speaking at the Royal Institution and the Wellcome Trust, and has appeared on high-profile programmes and platforms, including Newsnight, Horizon, Channel 4 News, Al Jazeera, and BBC Radio 4. So who better to help me understand what the future holds for European particle physics and CERN? Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time to meet with me today. We will start with the easy ones. Professor Womersley, how was Christmas? I'm sure you're excited to leave the mince pies behind and get back to discussing particle physics.
Christmas is always great, but this year we managed to avoid cooking. Found a very handy list of restaurants in Edinburgh that are open on Christmas Day.
Very nice.
Most of them seem to be Indian and Turkish or Pakistani, but that was perfect for me. And then a very nice trip to Switzerland for the new year. So I'm refreshed and ready to get back to work.
Superb. Professor Butterworth, same question to you. Any particle physics themed Christmas presents?
Not really, no. Well, no, not at all, I'm afraid. But no, we did a lot of cooking, though. We enjoyed the cooking. We do a Christmas dinner for us. My children are both kind of not children anymore, but they both came back and we cooked family Christmas. And then we also had a trip, in our case, to France over New Year and managed to do a bit of skiing, which was fun.
Fantastic. Right. So let's get into this. So just before Christmas, the European Strategy Group filtered down all the input it's received from the European particle physics community via the European Strategy Engagement Vehicle and offered its suggestions to the CERN Council regarding where CERN and Europe should focus next in terms of particle physics. So, Professor Butterworth, maybe if I come to you first here. Before we get into the specifics of those recommendations, what are your overriding thoughts regarding the suggestions that we have seen? Because I saw that you did a rather nice talk about it before Christmas, which I have here as well, that we can jump into.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, I'd say there are two things go on in this strategy. And there's always a worry that it is completely dominated by what is CERN going to do next.
Yeah.
And while CERN is absolutely brilliant and key to the future of particle physics, there is more to particle physics than CERN. And I think there are some very good kind of ancillary statements in there about the way the field should develop. I think there are possibly some missed opportunities. I would like to have seen a lot more, for instance, about how machine learning and AI are impacting our field and how we could maybe take more of an active role in that beyond our field. I think at the moment CERN is not playing a huge role in that, although in fact those technologies are having a really big impact on the physics we're doing with the Large Hadron Collider at the moment. So I think there were possibly some missed opportunities because everyone was, as we'll get onto, I'm sure, basically
interested in the big rings,
headlights about what's the next big machine CERN wants to build. And I think that's a little unfortunate, but very understandable, and I'm sure we'll get by on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, John, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think like this is a very long, exhaustive, thorough consultation process, and like any of those things, you kind of know what's coming before it comes, and so the end result is eminently sensible, but lacking in any surprise or wow.
Yeah.
And that's, my boss, the vice principal here, came and sat down in my office and said, John, can you explain what this means? And, it means we continue to do the physics that we have laid out as our highest priorities. We're talking about a new machine to do that, and we'll get onto that later. Yeah. And we continue to pursue theoretical physics, we continue to pursue astroparticle physics, we continue to pursue precision measurements. CERN continues to contribute to neutrino measurements in the United States. So It's very, very sensible. It feels one thing that's missing is sort of a wow factor,
Yeah.
or a level of ambition.
Yeah.
And obviously CERN has had to manage within the plausible future resources that it can think about, and that leads to a pretty slow timeline as well. And those are all factors that I'm sure we'll come back to in this discussion.
Absolutely.
But the physics is clearly the driver here, and it's the physics of the Higgs boson, which remains extremely interesting and uncharted.
Yeah.
So I'm getting the sense from both of you that the kind of broader statements are eminently sensible. They're reasonable. We want to continue to do particle physics, reach off into the energy frontier, study the Higgs boson, obviously, that we've just found. However, potentially there's some missed opportunities in there, and different ways that perhaps we can realize that vision that maybe we can come on to. And
we'll come on to. I think one thing that's missing is a sort of sense of urgency / excitement. Now, a big organization like CERN wants to be sensible. It wants to show that it's got its cost and schedule plans very much under control. But what you hear from some of the younger people is it seems to take an awfully long time to deliver this program, and that may be true, but it's smaller projects that can be done faster in parallel become extremely important. They're not just as complementary ways to access the physics, but as opportunities for training and learning, for people to do things that on a much faster timescale, more like a graduate student PhD timescale, for example.
Keeping people excited, keeping them engaged with the field as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Just to come back to what I said about it being a little dominated by that, there is something exciting about this in the sense that CERN is a lab that can deliver this kind of stuff, and there have been major projects talked about with no home. The linear collider has been kind of traveling around the world looking for someone who wants to build it for a long time. The exciting thing about this is there's a major lab, probably the only place in the world that can actually deliver this kind of stuff at the moment, that has a future which is as John said, eminently sensible. May lack the wow factor unless you go wow for how big the tunnel is. But that's partly because familiarity of it. We kind of it's not a surprise. These big projects don't suddenly get invented overnight. There's obviously a lot of preparation, but that's actually part of the underlying excitement, is that actually this can be delivered in Europe.
Yeah. One would have thought potentially with Mark Thompson. Obviously, he was one of my lecturers at Cambridge, with the linear collider wandering around the world and his background. Maybe it would have found a home at CERN, but we will come on to discussing that.
We'll come on to other ways that you could do this physics.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting at there. So let's touch on some of the specifics here. So physicists have criticized the update for suggesting that the flagship, when I can get it out of my mouth, collider program at CERN should be the full Future Circular Collider program, the FCC program. So if I come to you, Professor Womersley, first, what do you make of that suggestion? And do you think it aligns fully with what the community wants? So just to set the groundwork here, this would be a 100-kilometer long tunnel in the Geneva Basin. Initially, we would have an electron-positron collider, which would do a lot of electroweak physics. It would be a Higgs factory, so we could look at the Higgs with precision. And then we would move on in the 2070s to higher energy proton collision, so scouring the energy frontier, essentially a large hadron collider in the 2070s. What do you make of that vision, and does it align with what the community wants at large, do you feel?
Broadly, I think it represents a way of satisfying the community's desire for a precision Higgs measurement machine, which has been on the table for a long time. People have talked about an E plus E minus collider, the linear collider, or a cheaper, smaller electron-positron collider, or doing something similar in China, as we may talk about later. So almost as soon as the Higgs was discovered and its mass was known, one could think about and did start to think about precision machines to explore the Higgs properties in greater detail. But making it part of this longer program provides a way that you can look beyond those precision measurements to the kind of high energy frontier exploration that might be motivated by finding a discrepancy of the Higgs properties from what we now believe, or what Peter Higgs predicted. Without that, you would be left with a machine that could make a lot of precision measurements, but couldn't actually explore anything beyond the whether the Higgs looked like the Higgs that we think it is. The downside of this is that by putting that electron-positron collider in a tunnel which is objectively larger diameter than is really needed for that machine by itself, because it's got an eye to the future, it makes it more expensive.
Yes.
Not the whole program overall, but it makes the first stage appear more expensive, and that's come in for some criticism. And then the second part is that this program makes sense, but it takes many decades to deliver. And so governments and funders will be understandably concerned about whether there's technological evolution likely to happen during this period, whether things could get more compact, whether the physics will remain as cutting edge as we think it will. I believe it will, but let's wait and see. Whether other ways to reach very high energies might become possible, etc. So we're looking at a program that will take until 2070 or so to fully realize here. That's an awful long time. And it begs the question of whether we want today to lock in at such a long vision. Now, we're not really locking it in. There's plenty of intermediate decision points, but the civil engineering that's going to be started makes sense really only in the context of this longer term vision.
Yeah. Professor Butterworth, is that where the sort of rubber hits the road? Everyone seems to be in the community happy with some type of a Higgs factory. This is the natural next step. We know where the Higgs is now, 125 GeV. We can make a machine to produce lots of these things, study them with large statistics. But it seems a little bit where a little bit of consternation comes in from the field is you're kind of smuggling this tunnel in. We could do this Higgs factory in a different way. Do we need this energy frontier machine? It's not passing any sort of well-known energy thresholds that might throw up something new. What is 10 TeV? We knew the Higgs or something like it would be at the TeV scale, but 10 TeV, it sounds nice to us. It's an order of magnitude higher in energy, but what are we kind of looking for apart from di-Higgs, Higgs potential stuff? Is that where potentially a little bit of consternation comes from the field, that it feels like that second stage has been smuggled in with the first?
I don't think so, actually.
No.
I think that's one of the deciding factors in why they've gone for the circular tunnel. We're not all the same. We're not the Borg, right? So not all.
I'm being devil's advocate as well, just to be clear. But
not all particle physicists agree on I think we all agree that the Higgs sector needs to be explored more thoroughly. Okay, not everyone does agree on the best way of doing that. I think everyone is content to go along with this plan on something that you have to have a plan, and this is a sensible one. That's not to say there wouldn't be other sensible ones, but one of the deciding factors in going for this circular tunnel is exactly this future of that you can put a hadron machine in it, which you cannot do with you cannot get to 10 TeV with a linear collider, and so I don't think it's smuggled in. I think that's a feature, not a bug. If you like.
I think, Sam, you were telling us earlier that you're getting married later this year, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
You're going to be thinking about moving into a house, perhaps with your new partner. Are you going to get a house that's got 4 bedrooms with room for expansion for a future family? Or are you going to choose the cheapest house that meets your needs?
Can we do the car first?
So building a larger tunnel is like the house with more bedrooms. You know that one day you're going to need it. It might impose some greater upfront costs, but it gives you space to grow. I remember talking a long time ago to Herwig Schopper, who's sadly no longer with us, but was the director of CERN when LEP, the original electron-positron collider, was being proposed. And he said one of the things he was proudest of was building a big tunnel for LEP, a larger, more spacious tunnel than LEP itself really demanded, because there was always the idea in the back of the engineers' minds that you could put the Large Hadron Collider, which eventually became the LHC, into that tunnel. Yeah. At the time when they were doing it, they didn't understand how to do that. They didn't know how to build the magnets with high enough field, but
you had the flexibility,
that expansion room. And as John was saying, CERN as an independent organization with a treaty can make these kind of forward plans in a way that gives continuity and gives the best value for money in the long term.
Yeah, so I think there's a very broad consensus, not unanimous, but a very broad consensus that this tunnel is the right piece of infrastructure to invest in to keep Europe at the forefront of particle physics for the foreseeable future. There's less of a consensus about exactly what you do with it and when, I guess, but there is a plan A, and people are broadly behind that, I think.
So the pros of the tunnel here, we've got the future proofing, so we have this ready to go for 100 TeV um, proton collisions. We can use similar technology to what we've used. I know there are improvements in magnets needed. You also kind of secure a kind of long-term vision for the community, right? You keep the collider physicists engaged, doing things. Is there any flexibility, Professor Butterworth? I don't know if we get to 2070 and we have the muon collider all ready to go. Is there any flexibility for using that larger tunnel, for example, for the accelerator ring of a very powerful muon collider that maybe you put then in the LHC? Is there flexibility for what we could do with this big tunnel, or is that literally we'll see when we get there?
I think so. I think there is flexibility. I know people have thought about that as a very, very long term thing that you might do. There are certain fundamental limitations with muons, which mostly come down to where the neutrinos go from them.
Yes, of course.
And I'm not actually myself sure whether the layout of the tunnel is prohibitive on that in the end. That's the only, anything else you can kind of hand wave about technology and say we might get there, but that might end up being a fundamental limitation.
Yeah, I think being in an urban area with lots of people around as well might not be the best.
Yes.
But certainly if there are advances in magnet technology or accelerator technology, it would actually enable you to build a future collider, a hadron collider in that tunnel that was more powerful than ones that are currently foreseen. And I think that would be an interesting possibility. The tunnel is relatively low risk. I mean, if there's one country that knows how to build 50, 100-kilometer long tunnels through this kind of terrain, it's Switzerland, and they've built hundreds of kilometers of railway tunnels. They know what the cost will be. The cost is not cheap, but it's understood. And you're not taking an enormous risk, even though it looks like let's not say ridiculous engineering proposition, a very ambitious engineering proposition. But on the scale of transalpine tunnels in Switzerland, it's known how to do it and it's known how to cost it. So the proceeding with that is not likely to run into unforeseen problems. My fingers are crossed. The magnet technology, as you say, that goes in it is the area that needs further development for the hadron machine.
So if we talk about a few of the cons that someone who's against the building of this large tunnel at significant expense might say, one of the things we sort of mentioned, Professor Butterworth, is that it locks the community into a kind of very long program of work where we're expecting at the moment to be building a machine in the 2070s that looks kind of like a machine that we built in the 2010s at the moment. That might change with technology, as you said. Do you see that as a problem? Does it suggest that kind of R&D hasn't moved on as much as we might have liked in the next 50 years if we're still looking to build a bigger version of an LHC? I think about where technology was, 50 years before the LHC, and it's radically different, or was a huge jump. Do you think that's an issue that people?
I think I think there's an issue of perception there, and to some extent, I have my this is not now speaking for the community, but my own opinion on this is, and I alluded to this before. I think this mantra that you need electrons for precision and protons for discovery is not that solid anymore. That's certainly the way that LEP and LHC worked, but the LHC is producing more Higgs bosons than an E plus E minus Higgs factory ever will. And the difficulty is picking them out of the data, and we're getting a lot better at that. So I have.
This goes back to what you were saying about AI, right? If you can
exactly, I have reservations that the window of extra precision you get narrows, and already the LHC is getting close to some of the targets that it was supposed to do after another 10 times more data, and so after 10 times more data, it will be even further along. So I think the flexibility is important, and I think there is flexibility in the investment of this tunnel. And I don't expect the community to say, right, this is what we're doing, no more discussion for the next 70 years or 50 years. I think this is why what I said about the infrastructure of the tunnel is important. I think there is a really broad consensus. This is a very powerful, flexible infrastructure that you can use to do absolutely cutting-edge physics. There may be several ways you can do that, and you may want to switch the order or reprioritize those, depending what we learn from the Large Hadron Collider, depending how technology develops, and so on. So I think what we need, right? We need room for innovation, and we need room for excitement and short-term things, some of which will be connected to the collider, some of which will be completely independent. But you need a long-term goal as well. I would not want to be the one that stepped and said, if we don't start doing something like this now, the one thing that you can guarantee is that by 2070 we won't have one.
Yeah.
And so, of course, I won't have one anyway. But never mind. I think it's getting that multiple complementary levels of ambition and timescale and innovation and flexibility. So with the typically a lot of the science you get from these big facilities is serendipitous, actually, and you're opening, and this is why in general exploring the energy frontier is exciting. It's even more exciting when you have a guaranteed thing like the Higgs mechanism you'll probe, but it's still a thing to do. It's still a frontier of knowledge that is going to reveal serendipitously probably really cool stuff.
Is there a concern here, though, just to finish off with that, Professor Butterworth? We talked about the flexibility that this is going to stretch the CERN budget, or seems to be with this building of this tunnel, that then you potentially don't have the flexibility to do muon collider R&D or as much as you might like. Is that a concern?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't put the muon collider R&D as the problem. I think that's something that the rest of the world has labs as well and can do work on that. I do think, and there's a genuine concern in the community here as well, that CERN has quite a broad program. It has test beams, it has an antimatter factory, it has nuclear physics facilities, it has the beam dump experiments. I think there's a lot of nervousness in the community that if CERN just focuses on this, then that's too narrow. And also the R&D for high field magnets that you would need in the end for the hadron machine as well. So I think that's a challenge for Matt Thompson and CERN Council and people to deal with. He gave an address
the other day,
and he acknowledged those challenges, and I think they're thinking about it seriously. And when we know what projects get approved, what the budgets are planned to be, and that's part of the art of managing, the science of managing a lab. And I think it will be very bad for the field if we really do nothing but civil engineering for the next 3 decades. It's not going to work. So I think everyone knows that, and it's got that line has to be trodden carefully.
Yeah, absolutely. So
one of the aspects of that, when the LHC was under construction, CERN had to demonstrate that it was tightening its belt in order to satisfy its political paymasters, that as much of its resources were going to the LHC as possible, and hence the demand on the taxpayer was as minimal as possible. And that meant reducing staff numbers. It meant stopping some of the programs that were not contributing to LHC. And as John Butterworth just said, that can lead to a narrowing of the physics program. Focus is good, but too much focus loses sight of the other things that are going on in the field. There's also a worry that CERN itself should not become the only place where European governments and taxpayers spend their particle physics budgets. We need to support our universities. We need to support the theoretical physics enterprise, computational work. We need to have a portfolio of other experiments. In the UK, we're working on experiments in the United States, in Japan. So we don't want this to become the only way in which particle physics is done for European countries either. It's a very important way. It's the principal pillar. But if it becomes the only thing that we're doing, we're not getting the best return on our investment and the best opportunities for our young people.
And John, maybe if I carry that through with you, just to play devil's advocate again, my favorite science communicator, as you'll know, Sabine, would, yes, obviously that's a joke. She would raise a point like, for example, that if you are going to run this program, this is potentially not the most optimal program. There are other ways to do this. There may be a perception that CERN is more interested in making sure that its lab has a goal, it has this infrastructure, it stays at the center of European particle physics. Do you think there's an issue with perception there? She would say something totally over the top, like particle physicists are scamming you to keep their cozy jobs, which is ridiculous. But if there's a perception that we're doing something to keep the field running that isn't necessarily optimized for the physics, then you can see that maybe there's a tiny little inkling of truth there. Is there a problem with that perception?
Yeah, this narrative affects any long-term, large-scale science and engineering enterprise that requires pooling of resources. It's points that were made about the space program in the United States even before the first humans landed on the moon. It's been made about the fusion program at ITER, and it's an argument that you hear people make about CERN. The way to build to do experimental particle physics has required a series of large billion scale investments in machines, which necessarily take a decade or more to construct. The way to do that is to pool our resources. We've done so by setting up CERN as an international laboratory. This then creates a sort of it's a tool that you can use to continue to deliver the next generation of large projects, and that's what we're seeing in this program, a multi-stage program of investments. But to critics and to those who are cynical by nature, it looks as if the organization is inventing these future projects merely to sustain itself, but it's not. These are coming out of the physics. But that needs to be communicated clearly. That a Higgs factory is not some form of universal basic income for particle physicists to keep us all happily fed. It is a scientifically motivated next step, and CERN is there to deliver this. And doing so through CERN is actually taxpayer friendly because it's a much more economical way to do these kind of large projects. You can debate, and I suspect your favorite communicator would debate, whether particle physics is worth supporting at all. It's a slightly different one, but I believe that there are open questions here that need to be addressed. They need to be addressed experimentally because our theoretical colleagues, despite their best efforts, need more data to stimulate new ideas. And the way to get more data is to pursue a next generation of machines. But CERN does have to demonstrate that this is doing it in a way that's aware of concerns. In an age of social media, in an age where in the United States there's a government which is openly attacking some of its higher education institutions along this line, that you're just working for your own benefit and not
it's
doing
an elite white elephant that we can pull money from and put back
into. So two things, CERN needs to sorry, not CERN, the particle physics community, because this is not CERN's problem, it's all of our problem. Need to articulate how this is to people's benefit. Maybe precision measurements of the Higgs boson are not to their benefit. So it's the technology and the skills and the capabilities that we have developed in order to do that filter their way out into the community. And we need to demonstrate that we're doing this in a way which is getting the most bang for the taxpayer dollar, pound, or euro. And to reassure people that when we're working in what looks like an elite institution relatively far away, we're doing so because that's the best place to do this research. The research is worth doing, and that we have a strong role influencing the future direction of how that money gets used.
Well said. So another criticism, Professor Butterworth, of the ESG's recommendations from the community is that they offer little in terms of a plan B. So if I can bring up my little meme there from Patrick Mead. Plan A is to dig this tunnel and proceed with the full FCC program. So electrons or electron-positron and then hadron-hadron. And plan B is to dig the tunnel and proceed with a descoped version of the FCC-EE with less interaction points, less physics runs, maybe no top quark run. What do you make of this kind of lack of plan B? Because I remember a couple of years ago, the German funders specifically asked CERN for different scenarios without an FCC-EE. I know, John, you have written specifically about this, that CERN should have been very serious about this request from its biggest funder in Europe. What do you make, Professor Butterworth, of that lack of plan B?
I think we're in this is a very political stance that the European Strategy Group has taken. Whether or not it's tactically right or not, I don't know. I agree with John W. that there are major concerns from the funders of CERN who wanted to see a plan B that was substantially cheaper, essentially a plan that you could deliver within roughly the budget you have now, rather than asking for more money. And I don't think the strategy group have delivered on that. Now, there's a game of trust here, right? Because if you don't trust your funders, then they say, no, show us a cheaper option, and then that's just their
and then they're always going to go for that option if it's there.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
So I mean, it's not true to say that. I mean, there was a lot of discussion in the UK, in particular, of real plans B, some of which were substantially cheaper, all of which were at some level inferior to Plan A. But there are options there, but none of them are as fully understood and costed as even the de-scoped Plan A, which is now being labelled Plan B. So I can. There's definitely frustration in the community and in the fund and in the countries, the member states, in some places with your meme that this is just that this is a political game that's being played here. But it is a very clear statement that the community thinks that this Plan A is so good that the next best thing is to do it, but not quite as good. and it does also leave open the option that if other countries and other contributors step up, you restore Plan A. So I think arguably it gives clarity and it's digging your heels in a little bit. Whether those heels will hold or whether they'll have to do more, I don't know. We'll see. The process is not over yet.
Is it a dangerous game that you either get sort of everything you want or nothing?
The whole thing is a danger.
The whole thing is dangerous, right? Asking anyone for a 100-kilometer tunnel to just do basic science to understand the universe is mad, right? But we did it with 27 kilometers. So
it's a little bit of game of poker or chicken or something, right? As John B just said, if your Plan B is substantially different and looks cheaper, then it makes it look like that is the preferred route to give the taxpayer.
We're getting a behind the closed doors, the things that you've been involved with for years here, John W. I fear.
Yeah, but this was an approach that was taken and worked out well in the end with the Large Hadron Collider itself. CERN Council authorized management of the lab to go ahead with LHC at a D-scope level, but before that was even put in place, additional contributions from the United States in particular were identified outside the CERN member states.
This is interesting history you see that I'm not aware of, but
no, and it enabled the and this was after the cancellation of the superconducting supercollider in the United States. So it enabled US participation in CERN, which is a whole other story about a very large community there. But it meant that there is a precedent here to talking about a machine that is not as fully developed as you could as a sort of staging point towards what you want. I think there's also, I assume, would have been at least informal discussions with the German delegation to make sure that what was written in the strategy was not going to provoke an explosion in Berlin, because it would have not been helpful to have done that. We know that CERN management has been proactive in seeking alternative sources of contributions from the host countries who might pay an additional share of the cost of the tunnel, because so much of the civil engineering work will return to their local economies. And we'll talk later about maybe
Switzerland is absolutely desperate for this machine. If you look at the feedback on a national level,
indeed, and the Swiss economy, the Canton of Geneva economy, and the local area in France benefit substantially from the high-tech supply chain that CERN demonstrates. It's not just the money that's spent there; it's the R&D and new industries and products that develop there. So indeed, it's entirely fair that host countries contribute in a different way. Than those that are merely benefiting scientifically or benefiting through the central budget. So I think that there may be, I hope that there have been discussions that cannot be minuted and cannot be discussed openly that enable this not to be as enormously risky a strategy as it might appear. But we shall see. And it's interesting that this, Fabiola Gianotti and her team, having developed this strategy based on the scientific way forward, hand it over to Mark Thompson and his new team and say, hey guys, there's the future.
Go get the money.
And that's when the rubber meets the road politically. That's when the serious conversations need to take place. And there's a couple of years during which that will have to happen before any voting decisions are made in CERN Council.
Very interesting. Professor Butterworth, there's a couple of other things I kind of noted from the community sort of reaction to these suggestions, particularly regarding this perceived lack of Plan B, is that some in the community feel a little bit let down because they spent a lot of time looking at potentially muon colliders at CERN or the linear collider facility at CERN. Is it a shame that there wasn't more discussion of that? We've talked about, obviously, if you offer these If you offer these possibilities, potentially it gets jumped on, so there's a political game being played. But do you understand why some feel a little bit let down that there wasn't more mention of linear colliders or
the
different
things,
options?
the two examples you give are rather different, and
They are very different. Yeah,
and not the one that I would have most sympathy with, actually. Okay. So the muon collider R&D is not mainly driven by Europe. There are people in Europe who are very interested in it, but the main R&D is going on elsewhere, particularly in the United States.
To use the links with the muon creation of high intensity muon beams, right? Fermilab.
The Fermilab infrastructure would provide a really good place to do this. Fermilab's budget doesn't support that. There's a whole other podcast you could make.
Yeah.
But we can't do everything, and I think that's fair. And I think the muon. I think no one really expected CERN would go, hey, we're just going to do R&D for a muon collider now and bring all that in and work like. So I think that's not, the work they're doing isn't wasted. It will continue, and it may lead to a muon collider in the end. Yeah. The linear collider people are in a really, I don't know, it must be very depressing for them, to be honest. And this is whether they're the people who've been looking at the ILC on the superconducting technology that was developed in Germany, or the click technology that was developed at CERN. Yeah. There has been an awful lot of work done on that, and while some of it will spin out into other applications, it looks from this strategy like it was nugatory. So a lot of that. The caveat on that is that a lot of the physics is in common. So the E plus E minus, the studies for E plus E minus to Higgs plus Z, very many of them are still relevant. So I mean, that's the way it goes. You work hard on something like that. I don't think it's fair to say that either of those options were not considered properly. I think the people who would maybe more have a bit of a cause for complaint, perhaps, but again, I'll explain why I don't think so in the end, is the people who've been looking at lower cost options. So linear collider and muon would not be lower cost.
Something like LEP3 or something.
But LEP3, the electron hadron colliders, which you could do with the existing LHC beams, a few other smaller scale things like that. Now, I think that my flavor is those we really, or even actually going to a lower energy hadron collider first. So it's somewhere intermediate in between the LHC and the end goal of the 100 or 85 TeV machine. Those were discussed in some detail in the UK process, and I suspect in other countries as well. There's not much. They were kind of dismissed early on in this process. And I think that's where this is a tactic. There's a tactic going on there, because if you say, "Hey, we can still do some cool physics, and it's going to cost you a tenth of the money," then you're going to get that, aren't you? I don't think that the people's work there was wasted, because depending on events, on what happens with technology and politics and science, some of those options may well be incredibly valuable, and we'll see how that goes.
So just to make that clear for people, there were options of potentially doing an electron-positron collider, a LEP3 run in the current LHC tunnel, which obviously means you don't have to build the bigger tunnel. But then the problem is you don't have the bigger tunnel to then go to higher energy. So it's pros and cons. If you're going to do this LEP3,
the physics program of that machine is much inferior to the FCCE.
I mean, it doesn't go hugely beyond what you can do at the high luminosity LHC, which is, as John said earlier. I think there's been perhaps, you could look at this two ways. It's good that these options have been thoroughly explored. There was a political expediency because the FCC is perceived as an expensive and long-term program. It's politically necessary to show that you examined all the alternatives and decided to reject them based on evidence. But I also feel that it's probably good that the strategy says, enough, we don't pursue these anymore, because I wouldn't want to see people, let's not say waste their lives, spend their lives doing a lot of work on machines that are not likely to be constructed.
At some point, a decision
is better, and a decision on the International Linear Collider is long overdue, because that's been it's been a fruitful R&D exercise. But at some point, one has to acknowledge that this thing is not going to be built, because none of the major regions that are active in high energy physics has it in their future plan. And if that is the case, spending more money on R&D becomes a diversion from things that are likely to be more productive.
Professor Womersley, one of the other sort of comments I've seen regarding this sort of perception of a lack of a plan B is that the current plan isn't very inspiring for young physicists. So, for example, there's no path to higher energy until the 2070s, and Professor Butterworth there was saying he won't be around to see it. I probably won't be around to see it, or I'll be very old by the time we get to to those timescales. Is this potentially a difficult pill for young physicists to swallow?
It is, and I think one of the many facets of this problem is that energy, the increasing center of mass energy of our colliders, has started to run into some of the fundamental limits of the physics of materials in making higher magnetic fields and higher accelerating gradients. And there was relatively rapid progress during the 60s, 70s, and 80s with new technologies and new techniques that enabled us to get the sense that we could continuously upgrade by factors of 10 every decade in the energy. And it's not our lack of ambition, and it's not our lack of imagination. It's surface physics, it's the properties of magnetic materials that are stopping us. So we very much need to find interesting R&D challenges in these long-term projects, shorter term, interesting things for students and postdoctoral researchers, and indeed lecturers and professors to do. The Muon Collider has no shortage of such things. So one of the ways in which a national particle physics program can maintain interesting activities is to be international, not to spend all of one's time working at CERN. There are shorter term precision measurement projects that we need to pursue, searches for axions, searches for astroparticle dark matter, neutrino oscillation experiments, though some of those are getting pretty big and long term as well. I gave a presentation at Fermilab a while ago, and we talked about the Muon Collider not as a physics machine, but as a source of interesting R&D problems. And those R&D, the accelerator R&D problems that would attract young accelerator scientists and people who can build the next generation of particle physics accelerators. And somebody from the DOE said, but we have no authorization to do the Muon Collider. It said, it doesn't matter. It's a career tool. It's a recruitment tool. It's something that's interesting and exciting. And I think we need to look in the FCC program for those similar kind of things that are interesting, exciting. Maybe, as John said earlier, AI tools and development of software techniques is part of that.
I think this is true, but I would also the two things that I would add to that, and what John said about accelerator physics and also detector physics, there's a lot of challenges there. But we should also be aware that CERN has a really exciting program until the late 2030s at least, with the high luminosity IC. And now, if you're someone who's thinking of doing a PhD in particle physics, that's where you're going to do your science, and that's going to be absolutely amazing. And that's what I'm going to be working on for the next decade or more. So again, it's the complementarity of the long-term vision, the data coming in now, the smaller scale, the big scale. The other thing I would say is there's this discussion about theorists, and your favorite commentator you alluded to earlier talks about people inventing new particles just so they can get ruled out.
Let's not do the Voldemort thing. It's Sabine Hossenfelder.
Look, that's a bit where I actually kind of agree with her very often, this business of okay, I know why people propose new models to try and explain some of the issues, the things the standard model does not. But I'm much more, as an experimentalist, I'm much more motivated by measuring what does happen and comparing it to our best theory than I am by going looking for something that someone came up. Now, I do both because that's what we do, and there is interest in both. But the program at SCCE is really challenging from the theory point of view. It's really pushing the standard model and our understanding of how to make precision calculations at the sub-per mil level with the theory that we know works, but we've not pushed it that far. That there's a lot of theoretical challenges in actually matching from the theory side the precision that is anticipated from the experimental side. And this is about measuring what really happens. This is not about ruling out super.
There's a lot of no-lose physics targets, right? We have, the Yukawa couplings on certain things. We have the Higgs width, which is going to be absolutely a massive measurement to make, so we can get an inventory of everything the Higgs decays into. There's massive no-lose physics targets. It's not just making up these ghost particles and then going looking for them. That's not the game that we're trying to do.
To some extent, everyone knows that some of this model building is a way of parameterizing the precision with which we're measuring the standard model. When we're searching for production of massive new particles and you want to know what you would have seen, whether you could have seen something or not, a simple way to do it is to have a model that you can then test whether you would have observed it or not, because you can run that model through the simulations that we use of our particle detectors, and it gives you some confidence. So, when I drive to work every day, I never see a bear, but I'd like to know if there was a bear, would I see it? And it's the same kind of thing at LHC. the area of theoretical physics that I think a lot of these commentators focus on is the underlying quantum field theory of the cosmological, lambda CDM model and how that connects to particle physics. And that's absolutely true. We need to think about that as well. Is string theory, quantum gravity, whatever, the connecting points. But as John says, there's challenges in calculating the quantum electrodynamics even at the level of precision that we need. And we've seen that in the attempts to measure the mu on G minus 2. And so computational approaches, ways of combining data with simulation, there's a lot of new interesting things. I mean, what I would be interested in is understanding how the Higgs can exist in our universe at all, because the energy density of the Higgs field is so great that it should, the universe should be blown apart with 10 to the 120 something times more dark energy density than we apparently see. So connecting particle physics to cosmology is still an area which I think is very, very fruitful. And that means new measurements of dark energy itself should be part of this new understanding of the inflation that seems to have occurred in the very early universe.
I mean, this was the ethos of P5, right? Wasn't it? It was telescopes and colliders.
So this is again what makes the Higgs unique. It's the only scalar particle that we can make in the laboratory. It's the only thing whose properties we can measure. But in our understanding, in our view, in our models of how the universe itself originated, there are two other fields with similar properties. Whatever drove inflation in the very, very early universe and whatever is driving dark energy expansion seem to have Higgs-like properties, but very different energy densities, very different couplings. They work differently, but they're somehow part of the same sector. So maybe the Higgs is not just one thing. Maybe it's a whole window on a set of properties that the universe has that we don't know about. And so, Higgs is not just one particle predicted by a man whose properties we've already significantly characterized. It is sort of a different kind of matter. It's not a force. It's not matter like the quarks and leptons that we're made out of. It's something else.
Yeah, something entirely new that we need to understand. Professor Butterworth, as we move on from this, it's recently revealed that China won't be moving forward with the construction of its own circular electron positron collider, CEPC. It's not in their next 5-year plan. This would be a machine that would essentially have been equivalent to the FCCEE first phase. So in terms of particle physics, they're instead moving on to the proposed Super Tau Charm factory to succeed the Beijing Electron Positron Collider 2. What are your thoughts on this development? I mean, it gives more space for CERN to proceed with what it's doing, but we'd like more machines. How do you feel about this overall?
Well, it certainly simplified the discussions, I think, in the European Strategy Group for sure, because I think most people would agree it would not be good for the field to have two identical, more or less, machines trying to be constructed. That didn't end well last time, and it wouldn't end well this time, I think. So I think though that what they proposed is not a replacement. Okay, my reading of it, and reading Chinese politics is not my professional skill, and I'm not sure if it does it. But if you look at what that community is doing, it's moving. First of all, China has the capability to deliver massive infrastructure projects fairly quickly. Very quickly, the scientific community there have recently turned on a really world-leading neutrino experiment, a Juno experiment, which is a level up from anything China has achieved in this area before. It's not a collider, but it's got a lot of the physics drive is very similar, and the technologies are related. The accelerator that they proposed, that they have in the plan, is not even on the scale of the FCC or the Chinese Circular Collider. So it's not a replacement. It's a kind of it can be interpreted as, at least, let's get there in steps. Let's scale up again with our accelerator, and maybe next 5-year plan we'll do it. And so I definitely explicitly did not say
they would still have that timeline, right? Because they move so much faster than CERN. They could revisit in 5 years and still.
And they've been very careful in what they've said. They've said if Europe is completely committed to FCCEE, they will not build CEPC. Yeah. They have said that. But they've been very careful to say completely committed. They don't mean what we've got now.
Like we're not done here. If you do something else, we can still jump.
Right. By completely committed, I think they mean the budget's in place and we're digging a hole at least. And we're a long way from that. Yeah, a few years from that at least. So ask me again in 5 years' time about that. I think the Chinese they've made huge progress. There's already technological developments coming out of that CERN will exploit. I mean, a lot of it was piggybacked off CERN R&D to set the project up in the first case, but the dialogue has already started in that there's a bit of a two-way going on already with that kind of infrastructure and R&D. So I think it's really exciting. I think it was probably good clarity that it's great that they actually had a clear decision.
It's good to have another player in the space, right, who's putting money into these projects.
There are other projects like the ILC that have been longing for a decision, even if it was a no. So I think, and this is not a no, this is not yet, and maybe later. And I think then the ball is in Europe's court, and that simplified things, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the Tau Charm Factory is a much smaller thing. It's within the scope of what the Institute for High Energy Physics in Beijing could do with its own resources. It keeps them active. This is an area that
it's their plan B.
Yeah, but it's also an area that has international community that might come to use it, because it's been talked about as a future machine that could have been built in Russia, could have been built in Canada at Triumph. It's of a scale that's one could be confident that it can be delivered, but it could internationalize Chinese high energy physics in the same way that their neutrino program is doing. I've been involved in the Square Kilometer Array radio telescope for many years, and China is a full participant in that project and is contributing important instrumentation and capability. So you're absolutely right that their industry's ability to build cutting edge equipment is absolutely there. And so you could imagine in some future world, Chinese magnets being installed in the FCC Hadron machine.
Professor Womersley, as we come to the end of this section on the ESG suggestions, what does the future look like on this? So when do those recommendations get rubber stamped? When are we going to get the diggers in the ground? When can we expect to get movement, a full decision on this? I think there's a CERN Council meeting in May. Is that the next time we can expect to hear?
The CERN Council has to consider this, and I assume, John, you are part of that consideration.
No, not anymore.
Not anymore. Okay, right. But CERN management has been very clear that no financially committing decision is likely before 2028, and so there is a 3-year period during which Mark Thompson and his team are going to have to do a lot of scientific, diplomatic, stakeholder engagement, and also with the local communities and with the people who are likely to be affected by a prolonged period of construction. Some of that's already been undertaken. Reassuring CERN's financial stakeholders that the project management controls would be in place to guarantee that if and when construction starts, the money will be spent in a way that is carefully monitored, that there's any delays to schedule and cost overruns will be caught very early and remedial action can be taken, and so on and so on. CERN will need to borrow money to do this, so there will need to be a willingness of CERN Council, because the spending profile doesn't match the contribution profile, willingness of CERN Council to take on that debt. Historically, that's been something that some governments have found tricky. But the Large Hadron Collider high luminosity upgrade hasn't turned on yet, and I think that needs to be, as we've heard, that needs to be fully operational and exploited.
Is this almost a kind of trial run to show we can deliver this in the time scale on the budget?
I would expect that people on CERN Council are going to say, I want to see high Lumi LHC turn on, operational and working well. There's certainly preparatory work that can be done and should be done for FCC while that's happening. But I would be a little bit surprised if a full decision was made to commit to the full FCC, even the EE stage of the FCC, until high Lumi LHC was a success, because I think it would be in the back of the mind people's worries that when LHC was turning on and there were significant problems with the magnets and remedial work was needed and delays to the schedule occurred, they'd like to be reassured that nothing similar is going to happen this time around.
Interesting. And John there mentioned the funding. So another thing, Professor Butterworth, that we saw just before Christmas, I believe this was as well. Yes, just before Christmas. Is for the first time in CERN's history, a group of private donors, including the Breakthrough Prize Foundation, the Eric and Wendy Smith Fund for Strategic Innovation, and the entrepreneurs John Elkann and Xavier Niel pledged $1 billion towards the construction of the Future Circular Collider. Now, what do you think about this development? Because I've heard, some people think it's a little bit strange, like John here. Some people are more positive that it's good that we have different funding sources. Other projects in the past have relied at least partially on private funding. Where do you fall on this, Professor Butterworth?
I guess pragmatically, is the way I would summarize it. I would like to live in a society where these major international companies and that paid enough tax so that we don't need to go to them for this kind of thing. However,
we don't live in that perfect world, and therefore
we don't live in that world. And at some level, the things like the Wellcome Trust and stuff have done enormous good in terms of funding research. The Schmidt Foundation is already doing great stuff with the next generation trigger for the high Lumi LHC, in fact, which has had a real impact on work we do actually at UCL. So you see the real benefits come down already there. This is not just grandstanding, this is real. So I think if they're managed through trusts and managed appropriately, these can be very positive. And, the Simons Observatory is another one. It's not that new. CERN, the danger is that it's similar, I guess, to the situation with the NHS. People should be able to rely on good treatment and not the hospitals are not charities. Hospitals are there to fulfill a role that is taxpayer funded. And you could take the same view of CERN. And in the past, things like that augment CERN's mission, like the science centre, the visitor centre,
the outreach aspect of it,
have been part of this, and it's a very recent development. And the Schmidt Foundation thing on the global trigger for the Atlas and CMS upgrades, I think, was the first time the core scientific program has actually benefited from this stuff directly. There are dangers in it. I'm not so worried about undue influence and those kind of things. I think CERN is smart enough, and the member states are smart enough to lock down the terms and conditions early on, so that you're not continually an ad hoc that if you don't do this, we will pull the funding.
That was going to be the first thing I went to. Is what are the strings that are attached to this?
I think the CERN Society Foundation, which is managing a lot of this, I think it's got work to do, but I think it's at least set up with the right principles, and it has to be transparent. These things have to be locked in. Universities are doing this kind of philanthropy thing a lot. UCL, has money to help. We have research hospitals, and medical science in particular benefits a lot from this, obviously, because people want to, very often it's someone contributing with a legacy to help to investigate the disease that's killed them or their family. And clearly you don't want to say no to that kind of stuff, but you have to be very careful in how it's managed and what kind of influence it buys people.
So if it's somebody's name on a lecture theatre or whatever, then fine. But if it's somebody saying you need to be doing this physics or you need to be building this, then there's potentially problems.
I think you do a deal and you say, is this close enough to our existing priorities that we would like the enabling factor that the money brings? Yeah. But once it's agreed, and you don't have someone looking over your shoulder saying, actually, we want to tweak it and do it this way, and can you let my kid have a PhD kind of thing? That's not the way it goes. So, and I think we're all smart enough to do that properly. I hope so. So, I think I'm more positive about it than John W. here, but I am.
Okay, I don't want to come across as negative. So I saw this, and as you said, Sam, I thought this is strange because it's a new thing in particle physics. It's not new in astronomy.
Yes.
It does leave a little bit of a strange aftertaste in my mouth thinking about it, because the experience in astronomy has not been universally positive. Especially in the United States, and US universities are very good at extracting philanthropic donations, and that's a route by which some major astronomical observatories have been funded.
You mentioned the TMT and the
it's a route by which some have got into big trouble as well, because they've been able to secure half a third of the investment that they needed from private donors, enough to get started, but not enough to get finished. And this might be a route then for CERN to go from plan B to plan A in terms of upgrading from a minimally functional thing. But I would hope that CERN has a minimally functional plan, not reliant upon private philanthropic donations, because one never quite knows. in astronomy as well, it's been used to leverage public funding to say we've got this private donation. It reduces the demand on
Yes.
the public funder. Let's get going.
Yeah.
And that's great. And it's worked in some cases. In other cases, as I said, it said, well, we never got the public funding. And now what do we do with the private?
This is exactly the problem that universities have as well, where you build some fraction of philanthropy expectation into a project and then it doesn't materialize. And this is what I'm saying. I think the budget needs to be absolutely nailed down and the contributions up front, basically. If they're part of, you either do it like John suggested, where you CERN funds plan B and then we turn it into plan A with philanthropy, or you if it's going to be part of the core, it has to be paid right up front and locked in from the beginning.
There's also always a concern that these people are somehow wanting to embellish their reputation and you see this in universities all the time, trying to greenwash their slightly sleazy capitalist history, for example. Now, don't wish anybody to assume. I'm sure CERN has done excellent due diligence on the people that they're talking to, and that there's nothing untoward about any of this. But the sort of the sense that one is helping people improve their public image sometimes sits a little uneasily. I remember having a discussion with somebody in a major US university, what they call development group, where they try to secure funding, and he was quite candid, and he said, you may not like where these people got their money from, but do you want them to hold on to it, or do you want them to give it to us? And so at that very pragmatic level,
there's a kind of pragmatism against kind of the, are you being, politically neutral? And,
that's right.
I can see where people could get a little bit queasy about.
It's something that we as a community haven't got used to, and we haven't figured out how to communicate it in a smooth way. And CERN is going to have to develop a very good story about the benefits to everybody of pursuing this approach. I mean, clearly there's a financial benefit. It enables either one to do more science or to do the same science for less. But what are the other long-term implications? How is this going to be managed? What would the next machine, does it create an ever-increasing expectation that more and more philanthropic money is...
Well, and does it distort the science program? There's a big difference between getting philanthropic money to do something which you've already established as your top priority, which is actually the case here. Or you say,
if you do this, I will put money into.
Exactly. So we're not in that situation. I think in the sense there that the European strategy process does give a lot of comfort and clarity on this, and it's very clear that this is the priority. That regardless of what the private donors say, this is what we want to do. Yeah. And if they want to help us, great, but we're not going to change our priority to suit them.
It seemed like the Breakthrough Prize earlier in the year was kind of the first salvo on this, wasn't it? We like what you're already doing. Here is a shiny badge for you. Oh, and by the way, we like what you're going to do next. Here's $1 billion or whatever it is. Like you say, it comes.
Yuri Milner has been interested in particle physics and supporting these kind of initiatives for a while, and I think there is a legacy of trust there that's been built up. This is an order of magnitude bigger than anything that's happened before.
Yeah, but also maybe I can just throw in some slightly dangerous to say maybe, but association with CERN is a way of governments and countries improving their reputation already.
Yeah.
And let's just bear that in mind. That the national, just because money comes from a government doesn't mean it's clean.
Yeah, fair.
No, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
So final question, because I know John W has a hard cut off in the next 10 minutes. I always like to try and finish on a positive note. I think we've been very positive. Actually, I was thought it would be more negative. So I think we've been very, very positive. We got that positive vision out there, which is what I always try to do. So let's finish on a positive note, and let's park the current recommendations from the ESG and the potentially overly influential billionaires. Let's start with John Butterworth, Professor Butterworth. If you were put in charge of the purse strings tomorrow, what would be your path forward for European particle physics? What would it look like? Where do you hope we go next? Give us your vision. Would it be the FCC full program, or would it be potentially something different? What would you...
So my first thing would be, and it's boring, I guess, in that it's predictable, is I want Atlas and CMS to work and the High Lumi upgrade to work. And that's where I want to do my science. And I honestly think we've kind of undersold that a little bit.
Yes.
I think there's some I'm just genuinely excited to see some of the results from that. So that's let's take that as a given.
There's still some exciting Higgs work coming out. I know people will say, "Oh, what have we found new?" There's still some amazing work being done.
That's right. That's right. I'm also very happy being in a group at UCL, for instance, where we've got people doing high intensity muon beams, we've got people doing neutrinos, we've people doing direct dark matter searches. The Bowlby mine could be really exciting if the UK government can come up with something there. All of these things and quantum technologies. I think there's a danger that we're going to drop the ball on quantum technologies for fundamental physics, but it's really exciting science, and I would want to put a load of money in that, even though I'm not working on it myself. Regarding the longer term project, I would. Then this is me now, and I don't want to irritate my mates on
No. This is Professor Butterworth speaking for Professor Butterworth. Yeah. There are other opinions available, but
yeah. I would look at the high field magnets. I want the tunnel, so we agree on that. I would want to look at what magnets we could feasibly build now, and I want to do intensive R&D on making them cheaper and more efficient, and not aiming for 100 TeV, aiming for whatever the biggest energy you can get, and trying to make it as affordable as possible. Now that may be quite naive, and there's probably accelerator physicists who will tell me there's no chance. But there are high field magnets we can build now. The problem is they're too expensive.
Yeah.
And so I would want to do intensive R&D on making the environmental and financial impact of that less. And then I would want to put that in the tunnel as soon as possible. But I'm also happy with the FCC forward look as well. But if I had my absolute favourite plan, that's what it would be.
Superb. John W., same question. Before we come to that, do we know, you might know a little bit more about this, what is happening at Bowlby? Because the last time I looked at Bowlby, they were considering doing the Watchman program, which was, trying to work out if we can see the neutrinos coming from hidden nuclear silos.
Hartlepool nuclear reactor, which I think has turned off. So
it's gone now. Hartlepool's gone.
So Bowlby STFC at Bowlby were looking at ways to build a much larger cavern that could host a next generation international WIMP dark matter experiment, liquid xenon experiment with various acronyms that I can't remember right now. I think that viability of that project is somewhat called into question because of budget cuts in the United States. So the US was going to be a major contributor to that, along with Europe and other countries. And the US has now said that they don't have the funding to put money in. So the immediate opportunity that was being pursued at Bowlby doesn't look as fruitful as it did, let's say, a year or 2 years ago. And that's a shame, because it would be, Bowlby is a great location to do underground physics. It's relatively deep. It's relatively straightforward to excavate fairly large caverns because the rock is rock salt, and it's soft enough to be able to drill through with machinery without doing blasting. So Bowlby is an underused resource for UK particle physics, and it would be really great to see an international project hosted there.
Absolutely. And just to repeat that question that I asked to Professor Butterworth, where do you think we should be focused?
Yeah, well, at the risk of repeating the same answer,
that's all right. We get the same message. Everyone's
I endorse the program because it's science driven, but the missing element is urgency.
Yeah.
And that is one of the reasons why some audiences might be a little cynical about this plan, because it looks as if CERN is doing everything at its own sweet pace. I would like to move faster, especially onto the high energy collider, because that's where my own scientific interests are more stimulated. And I completely agree with the idea of finding a way to get sufficiently high field magnets quicker than the carefully thought through R&D plan, which is laid out in the strategy. Do something at pace, even if it gets you to FCC 1.5 rather than FCC. The other thing I would like CERN to do is to find a way to contribute at a low level, but to coordinate European involvement in the Muon Collider, because I think that is an important thing. And CERN showed with its involvement in Proto-Dune and in helping the US get started on the accelerator-based neutrino program, it shows that CERN can fulfill this focusing, coordinating role for European contributions to physics projects in the United States. I think the Muon Collider is really interesting and exciting. It may be very, very hard to do, but it will provide an interesting thing for European scientists to be involved in. And if they can be involved in it through a CERN platform, maybe some experiments can be undertaken using the CERN accelerator suite. that would be a great thing to complement the focus on
It's
FCC.
a goal and excitement, and keeps the young people engaged as
Keeps
well.
young people engaged, and it means that the MC in the United States, because it's got international involvement, gets a bit more momentum and impetus in that system as well.
There are also a lot of potential economic benefits from that kind of R&D, right? That go beyond particle physics as well.
Yeah. And I am afraid I'm going to need to step out in a couple of minutes. So I'd like to thank you both. This has been a really stimulating and interesting discussion, and it's a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you to both of you for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it. I've learned a lot. I think people really enjoy it, and they'll have some fantastic questions to ask. So again, thank you so much. I will make sure all of your links and work are down in the description. And yeah, hopefully when we get to the next stage of this, we know where we're going next. We can meet again and set the world to right again.
Happy to. Yeah.
Anytime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye now. Bye-bye.
I want to know what you think, because you're the scholars of enlightenment that I do this for. So please take a moment, if you wish, to let me know down in the comment section. And if you like this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, setting up notifications, and sharing this video more widely. I can't tell you how much these simple actions help me out and how much I'd appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being scientific. Thanks for being bad.